Hello and welcome to Foreign Exchange. I'm Daljit Dhaliwal. This week we'll investigate the politics of the energy scare in Europe. Then we'll visit Bangladesh's amazing floating schools, and later we will go in depth about President Obama's Middle East peace initiative. All this and more coming right up on Foreign Exchange, where America meets the world.
This program is made possible through the generous support of the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, making grants to promote international understanding and address the root causes of global poverty. And now, Daljit Dhaliwal.
Russia's gas flows may have resumed to Europe, but relations between the EU, Ukraine and Russia remain frosty. Here to shed some light on the political tensions surrounding the recent gas dispute and what it means for Europe's energy future is former Swedish diplomat Anders Aslund. He's currently a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics in Washington, D.C. Anders, welcome to Foreign Exchange.
Thank you.
So let's rewind a little bit. Talk for a moment about who you believe instigated this dispute and the likely motivations.
I think that there were two instigators. One was Gazprom, Russia, and the other was Reconstruction, this shady intermediary that wanted to continue skimming off money on the Russian-Ukrainian gas trade.
And that's a Ukrainian company or a Russian company?
It's half owned by Gazprom and it's half owned by Ukrainian individuals who are supporting the opposition in Ukraine.
So what role then did corruption play?
Well, Reconstruction, this intermediary, siphons off at least $1 billion from this gas trade. And Reconstruction was afraid of being squeezed out, as indeed it was in the end. And therefore it didn't want to have an agreement.
So what effect has this row had on Gazprom's reputation as a supplier of energy?
Being disastrous. It shows that Gazprom did not care about its customers. The complaints about Ukraine were pretty flimsy. The so-called theft was tiny amounts that could have been natural losses in the pipelines in any case. And Gazprom did not try to get an agreement very soon. And we saw in the end that it was Prime Minister Vladimir Putin who settled it, who showed that he's the real CEO of Gazprom. So Gazprom doesn't look as a commercial company at all, but it looks as an instrument for state intervention in foreign policy and for corruption.
Well, how would you assess Prime Minister Putin's personal involvement? I mean, at times, you know, it seemed like his resolve and the language that he was using was a little reminiscent of the way he kind of conducted himself over the conflict with Georgia. What was going on? What were the underlying political dynamics there?
Well, what obviously comes out is that Prime Minister Putin is the dominant force in Russia. And this is both positive and negative. But we can see from the actual agreement that that was exactly what they were discussing on New Year's Eve. So here, more than 2 weeks of disrupted gas deliveries to Europe took place for no good reason whatsoever.
So why did Moscow want to antagonize the Ukraine?
It's difficult to say what was really the reason. Clearly there was an interest to maintain this corrupt agreement that they had. Another reason was probably to try to destabilize Ukraine and certainly to whip up Russian nationalism so that Russians would react against the Ukrainians rather than against their own government.
And did it have the desired effect in Moscow?
The popular support for the government, for Russia in this conflict was whipped up. That was the one positive effect, but all the other effects for Russia are really negative.
And what about the domestic considerations that were at play for Ukraine?
Well, here Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko was very interested in getting rid of this intermediary Rosso Crinergo because it supported mainly the big opposition party, the regions of Ukraine which represents eastern Ukraine, and also provided some support, according to Yulia Tymoshenko, to the president secretary, that is President Viktor Yushchenko.
So if Putin miscalculated and Moscow's attempts at playing hardball with Ukraine have failed, I mean, you mentioned the kind of impact that this is having on Russia's foreign policy. What exactly are the implications of that?
Well, the big implication would be that the European Union finally comes together and gets a Russia policy and an energy policy which is not in Russia's interest, because Russia prefers to deal with 27 members of the European Union as single entities and not as one union.
Is the European Union any closer to resembling something that looks like a common energy policy?
Yes, it is, somewhat closer. In two regards. When there was a settlement in Moscow, or before the settlement, the European Union sent its energy commissioner rather than a lot of different ministers. And the person who clearly told Mr. Putin what the situation was German Chancellor Angela Merkel. And Germany is the biggest importer of Russian gas within the European Union.
And just briefly, the contours of this deal that have been worked out between Russia and Ukraine, do you think that it's durable?
I think this is durable because it is a long-term agreement for 11 years, and it has a clear price formula, and it has been published, and it looks like a normal commercial agreement. So there is nothing funny in it, as has been the case previously when one thing or the other is only determined for half a year.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us in the program and giving us your insights.
Thank you.
Bangladesh is a land of rivers and its people have a long tradition of life on the water. However, a growing trend of climate-related natural disasters and extreme weather have this nation's 180 million inhabitants seeking out higher ground. Scientists predict that up to 20 million people could be displaced if Bangladesh's sea levels rise in the next 50 years. Here's a story about one Bangladeshi who isn't waiting for that to happen. He's adapting his community to survive floods today.
In Bangladesh, scientists say that within the next 10 to 20 years, 20% of the land will go under seawater. It already started happening in the south. Islands are getting smaller, and in the north, the rivers are getting bigger. We're getting more erosion and more floods. That's why Bangladesh is, you can say that it's the ground zero for the climate change. Every year, schools are flooded for 3 to 4 months. It happens during the monsoon season. We are now in northwest Bangladesh, and the school, you can see over there, it is now under the flood water. If the water level increases within the next few days, the students who are still in this class, they will not be able to come to the school. তখন কতদিন বন্ধ ছিল গত বছরের বন্যায়? 3 মাস। 3 মাস। 3 মাস তুমি কি করছিলে? ঘুমাইছো, খাইছো? কাজ করছি, মাঠে কাজ করছি। হ্যাঁ? খেলছো? He was playing. There are many school dropouts in Bangladesh, and it is because of regular flooding. During the flood last year, there are 330 schools were completely destroyed, and more than 4,000 schools were damaged. This is the reason I decided, why don't we bring the school to the student? In the northwest Bangladesh, there is not enough paved roads to serve these communities, so people have to depend on river and boats. Our school, boat school, is a combination of a school bus and schoolhouse at the same time, because it collects students from different riverside areas, and finally docking at a destination, it arranges on-board classes. This is our grade 1 board school, and they are reading off a book on biodiversity. This is one of the book being developed by our organization, and this is completely focused on the river and riverside pollution, biodiversity conservation. So what we can do actually to control the pollution, like keeping the latrines away from the water source, use of river water for irrigation, identifying beneficial insects. We have right now 42 boats in operation, and another 46 is under, we're designing it, but within this year we'll have around 100 boats in operation. We have placed solar panel on the top, and we have a structure to hold the panels, and from the panel it comes to the here we have all the equipment in this box, the battery chargers, the charge controller and inverters, and this is the batteries store the solar energy. In the board school we have a computer or laptop and hundreds of books, and with the computers they're getting everyday information. They're getting access to internet, and they're getting newspapers off the internet. So they're keeping update with what is happening within the country and also outside of the country. যখন তুমি বড় হবা তখন তুমি কি হতে চাও? বড় হলে আমি শিক্ষিকা হতে চাই। In Bangladesh, the pressure on land is always high. At this moment, we have 1,209 people per square kilometer. And if the country, 20% of the country goes underwater, which may happen within the next 10 to 20 years, where will these people will go? Because we don't have enough space, enough land, so people have to live on water in some way. Climate change is a global problem. Not only Bangladesh, the other countries should work together to address the climate change. We have to find solutions. For example, our solution to address the climate change, the both floating education system or floating housing project, which can be adapted in other settings, which can be done in a big scale that many communities around the world can be benefited.
In the aftermath of Israel's offensive in Gaza, Palestinians are dealing with the devastation, but they're also questioning where the politics go from here. With Hamas declaring victory for having survived Israel's military operation, it remains unclear whether its rival Fatah will be able to challenge its hold on Gaza. Here to bring us some clarity on this and the prospects for peacemaking is Ghaith al-Omari of the American Task Force on Palestine in Washington, D.C. He's also a former advisor to the Palestinian Prime Minister Mahmoud Abbas. Ghaith, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
One of the president's first calls was to Mahmoud Abbas, and one of his first interviews was given to Al Arabiya. What did Palestinians make of what the president had to say?
I think not only the Palestinians, but I would say the Arab world in general was very heartened by the fact that Obama, from day one, has expressed an interest in constructively engage in the Arab-Israeli peacemaking process, but also engage the Arab and Muslim world altogether. What was interesting is that there was no real shift in policy. There were no new policies that were mentioned. However, there was a new framing, there was a new language, and people are reacting very, very positively to this language. People are reacting positively to the fact that we have someone like Mitchell, a high-level, not only diplomat, but a high-level politician who is getting involved. So I think they're starting on the right footing. Of course, the question now is action. Where do we go practically from here? But I think Obama has pressed all the right buttons in his first week in office.
So in terms of where do we go from here, I mean, the president, as far as you're concerned, hasn't articulated a final vision of how we deal with the Arab-Israeli conflict. Is that your reading?
Almost certainly. Actually, what he did, if you listen to his speech when he announced the appointment of Mitchell and his interview with Al Arabiya, he repeated many of the same policies, the same U.S. policies, and these are non-partisan policies. The fact that we're not going to talk to terrorist organizations like Hamas, the fact that that the U.S. continues to support Israel and has a strong relation with Israel. These are all tenets of U.S. policy. These will not change. However, the framing, the willingness to talk, the willingness not to paint the whole Arab and Muslim world in the same brush, but to actually differentiate between those who want to talk and those who are fundamentally against U.S. values. I think this is the new thing. It's too early to have new policy. I think Mitchell is there to listen, to assess for himself. The administration has not fully been staffed. So the policy-making process is just starting. But the symbolism and the messaging, I think, has been very strong and very clear.
And some of that symbolism where he talked about, that he had lived in Muslim countries, and he also talked about respect. I mean, that was something that came up quite a lot, something that the Arab and Muslim world isn't used to hearing from an American president. What kind of impact did that have, do you think? And what do they feel personally towards President Obama? What do they make of him as a person?
First of all, obviously, the novelty and the symbolism of an African-American president in itself goes a long way towards rehabilitating U.S. image. It's a country where everything is possible. But also the fact that after 8 years of basically hearing ideology, hearing you're with us or against us, hearing about clash of civilizations, about good versus evil, you have someone who's saying, look, I understand you. I want to talk to you. I want to engage with you. That definitely struck a chord, I think, among people. I was looking at the talkback section in Al Arabiya webpage yesterday. With a very few exceptions, it was all positive, extremely positive. People are skeptical. People do not expect miracles, but people expect a new phase of relations, a new phase of, as you mentioned, respect. A phase that someone in Washington is willing to understand, willing to listen to the grievances. I think this is the difference.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the reality on the ground. I mean, on the ground in terms of Gaza, I mean, even before that happened, there was a lot of frustration among Israelis and Palestinians about, where the whole process was going. Do Palestinians still feel that a two-state solution is possible?
I think so. I think they feel it's possible, not because they're terribly hopeful that it's going to happen, because there's no other alternative. The other alternative would be continued occupation, continued conflict, and I think no one has an interest in that. People might be afraid that with the settlement expansion and some of the other measures, the two-state solution might become unrealizable, yet people are still hoping to achieve it. People are having a lot of hope in terms of the ability of President Obama to move that process. There are obstacles, whether the Hamas control in Gaza, whether the upcoming Israeli election where maybe a right-wing government will be voted in. But there is still a hope that we have a fresh start, we have a new energy being injected into the process, and maybe we will get the two-state solution.
What are the long-term implications of the war in Gaza for Fatah? I mean, does it make the possibility of the kind of diplomacy that Mahmoud Abbas has been championing that much harder to sell?
I think, ironically, despite all of the human cost and the human tragedy in the war and the humanitarian devastation, the war in Gaza has not changed the balance of power or dynamics of power in the Palestinian polity significantly. The reality is Hamas continues to control Gaza, the PA continues to control the Palestinian Authority continues to control the West Bank. Both are secure in there. The prospects.
You don't think that Hamas has been weakened in any way? I mean,
it has been weakened.
Fatah could mount a challenge to its.
No. Hamas has been weakened in its ability maybe to conduct operations against Israel, to fire missiles against Israel. However, Hamas has, since it took over Gaza more than a year and a half ago, has been quite ruthless and systematic in destroying the opposition. And even during this war, they executed and they jailed and they maimed quite a few of their opponents. There is no real opposition, organized opposition against them in Gaza. So even though they might have lost quite a lot of popularity for bringing this war onto Gaza, there is no real challenge to them. The same in the West Bank. People might be frustrated with Abbas, with the way that he responded to the Gaza crisis. Yet, there is no real challenge to his authority. So in the short term, I think things have not changed. The question is on the long term, though. If in 6 months' time, in a year's time, we come to a situation where Gaza is devastated and the West Bank is stagnant, where Abbas cannot point to any progress in the peace process, cannot point to any gains in the peace process, I think his popularity and his credibility will erode even further, his power will erode even further, and Hamas's message that diplomacy doesn't pay but violence pays will be revalidated, and I think ultimately this will lead to a victory for Hamas. If, on the other hand, the opposite happens, then Hamas will be on the defensive. So this is a long-term issue, and this is the real challenge that we face, I believe.
One of the issues, of course, has been this question of whether to open political contact with Hamas. I mean, should it have a role, do you think, within certain parameters?
Within certain parameters. I think Hamas has been very cynical in using the civilian casualties to try to gain some political cachet. They're trying right now to get a role in the reconstruction of Gaza, to get a role in the border crossings, and to get international recognition. And I think if at this moment the world community starts faltering on its conditions, starts talking to Hamas, it will be sending a very dangerous message, not only to Hamas, but to other organizations in the region. The message would be, it's fine to flaunt international law, it's fine to flaunt previous agreements, it's fine to engage in terrorism, we will still talk to you.
But over time, perhaps indirectly through a third party, you believe that this is inevitable, that it has to happen?
No, I think Hamas has to transform itself if this were to happen. Hamas has to play the political game, the international game. Hamas has to renounce terrorism. Hamas has to accept the two-state solution. And it has to pay the political price for joining the political club. The PLO did that in '88 when Arafat recognized Israel. He paid a huge political price for it, but that was the price for engaging. And Hamas has to do the same. If we allow Hamas and if we engage with Hamas and legitimize it, before it does that, we're sending a message to the whole region that you don't need to play by the rules. You can still be accepted while maintaining your unacceptable ethical and other positions. So I think Hamas has to continue being isolated.
Right. Talk a little bit about the reconstruction aid, the money that's going to go into rebuilding bombed-out Gaza. What role will that play in the fate of Hamas and Fatah?
If Hamas manages to tap into these funds that are coming in, if Hamas becomes the address for reconstruction, then Hamas is legitimized. Then then Abbas and Fatah will have nothing to show for themselves. You know, Abbas, the only message that Abbas has to say right now is peace delivers, negotiations deliver. If Hamas can start delivering as a result of the violence they initiated, I think then Abbas and the moderates will disappear and Hamas will be the main player. Hamas cannot be part of the reconstruction. I don't say Fatah cannot be either because Fatah has no presence. We have to have an international effort managed by an international body, be it the UN, be it a newly constructed body, to the reconstruction. But it cannot be done through Hamas. This will strengthen Hamas, this will inject funds into Hamas, and it will strengthen its political message and platform.
All right, Ghaith al-Omari, thank you very much for coming back on the programme. Good to see you.
Thanks, Nadia. It's always a pleasure.
We're keeping an eye on how other countries are coping with the global economic crisis. Taiwan's government has decided that one strategy is to give its citizens, regardless of age and income, shopping vouchers worth $107 to spend on a wide variety of goods. The idea is reminiscent of a Japanese economic revitalization plan 10 years ago and is worth over $2.5 billion. Supporters believe the coupons, which must be spent before this autumn, will help boost Taiwan's sluggish economy, while its detractors see little sense in doling out the cash when the funds for the vouchers themselves were borrowed. For more on this story and the others that we've covered in today's programme, please visit our website at foreignexchange.tv, and you can also drop us a line about the programme while you're there. That's it for this week. Until next week, I'm Daljit Dhaliwal. Thank you so much for joining us.
Foreign Exchange welcomes your feedback. Log on to foreignexchange.tv and send us your comments. You can also view episodes as streaming video and read the transcripts online. This program is made possible through the generous support of the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, making grants to promote international understanding and address the root causes of global poverty.